A message for my people.
Nick Dad, baby. We the new label.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Come on, son.
Now this the black sheep, sticking it to him. I need a crib
Like I'm Gatsby.
I
Need
need it in
it.
hand, just understand my
Pockets that deep.
with nothing to prove. I ain't got nothing to do, and they can't compete, and I got nothing to lose. You see, they told me I'm the one that's gonna benefit. Never been a threat, talking out of line, but never let me interject. 'Cause in a sense, I ain't spiteful enough.
Joining me now is Ben Fawkes, sports betting free agent, formerly of VSiN Live, DraftKings, ESPN. Brooklyn born, shout out to the 5 boroughs of death. Vegas based and a fan of all teams Minnesota. And dude, I gotta say, I think I might have told you this when I first reached out to you. I've been a fan of your work for a very long time.
I appreciate it, man.
I used to listen to you on a couple of podcasts you used to do back in the day, and then even just following you all these years, you put out these like dope reports of, 80% of the bets are coming in on this team, or the value of a player against the spread, or whatever it might be. So it's a pretty cool thing to have you on the show, dude.
How do I compare in person? I'm a little shorter, I think, than you. I'm sure you thought you're gonna be 6'5", giant, intimidating guy. It's just me. But no, I appreciate the kind words. I'm excited. The Twins just won. Their first series, I think, since 2002. So it's a good day. I'm happy to be here, man. I'm excited.
So you must be just like me in the sense of you enjoy misery and pain from your sports teams, because the Timberwolves, I'm assuming, also.
Yep, Vikings. A lot of suffering. So my dad's from Minnesota. I grew up, born and raised in Brooklyn, and we were kind of raised to, be rooting for all the Minnesota teams. Some ups, mostly downs. Twins won in 87 and 91. Not going to say I was fully conscious in 1987 of the Twins World Series. A little bit more in 1991, but man, there's been a lot of rough certainly in between. And the Twins hadn't won a playoff game since '04. Which was, I think, my junior year of high school. So It's been a long time. I think Royce Lewis, they said, was like 5 years old. He hit 2 home runs in game 1. So it's been a long time. It's great for the franchise to get a win, and I don't want to say anything from now is gravy, but as long as I got that first win, that's all I was looking for. And now I can relax, and somewhat it's playing with house money.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about those sometimes, because I'm someone who, I used to say in the past how whatever your expectation was going into a season for your team, if they surpass those expectations, it's kind of a win. But then it's hard for you to make the playoffs, or it's hard for you to get to these destinations that you're trying to get to. And then we become selfish, where we say, we want this. Now we want this, right? So it's always a weird dynamic to try to juggle. You did mention 1991, a very good year. That's when the boy was born. Shout out to the 91. Did you like growing up in Brooklyn, and what brought you out to Vegas?
I mean, it's very weird, like having recently just gotten married and you're thinking about kids and things. To get too personal on the podcast, I can't imagine kind of growing up anywhere other than New York City and growing up in Brooklyn. And then now you're thinking about like, oh man, how would you ever raise kids in New York City, in Brooklyn? It seems so bizarre, right? Like, we used to there were no cell phones, right? I took my brother on the subway to school every day, and then you come back from school on the subway, and hopefully you get to school and you come back from school, right? But that's it. There's no school buses you're getting on, or your parents are dropping you off and somebody's driving you, back and forth. So I think you grow up a lot faster in those ways.
Yeah.
And I also just loved it because you meet kind of so many different people. I played a ton of sports growing up, like soccer, baseball, tennis. And so especially like soccer, just playing with so many kids you wouldn't probably interact with just on a daily basis. And, kids all different, races.
The diversity alone.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Socioeconomic status. Just, I think there's so much that you're taught that you're not even taught in school, right? And so I think there's so many different things you get from growing up in New York you don't necessarily get from other places. It's hard to imagine growing up kind of anywhere else, or like in the suburbs and everyone goes to somebody's basement for a party, and it's just so different. It's like you're going out in New York City, right? You're trying to get into a bar, or going to an apartment party or something else. It's such a different like world, but I can't imagine anywhere else.
Oh, dude, this is music to my ears. And the reason why I was smiling as you were saying that is because I've been in Vegas now for a year, about a year and a month. And I tell everybody how it's the greatest city in the world to grow up in, New York City. The diversity, this guy's dad is a mailman. The other kid's dad is like, a Fortune 500 owner. Like, and you're in high school with these dudes, right?
Yeah.
Like, my dad sold coffee and bagels on the street to this day, 49th and Park Avenue. We got a coffee truck over there. So it's like you interact with all these different cultures and the diversity alone, where the high school I went to, the white kids were like the minority. Like, it was predominantly Hispanic, Asian, Black, Indian, and then white kids were like 15% of the population. But to us, it was always normal. Like, the diversity of New York City is the best. And you just learn how to become just like self-aware, I feel like. And people like to throw street smarts around and whatnot. And I just think you understand how to move a little bit different. And I didn't understand the New York hustle until I moved from New York, because we're just always around it.
Right.
And now when you come out here, you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. Now I get it. And
there's almost no difference because everyone's everyone's experiencing the same thing. Everyone kind of is that knowledge base.
Yeah, but what I tell people now is, I don't think it'd be a place I would want to live in again. The cost of living in New York is crazy. What you get for $1,000 in Vegas and what you get for $1,000 in New York is like vastly different.
Yeah, and it's weird. So I graduated. I'm a little older than you, but graduated in 2009, right in the middle of a recession. So that was a lot of fun. And a lot of New York City kids, as you know, like, go back. You live at home after college, whether or not you have a job. I did not have a job, but you go back, and obviously living at home is pros and cons. Certainly, the no rent is a pro, but after 2 years, like, I moved up to Connecticut, was working at ESPN. Like, I never actually lived in New York City, like in an apartment on my own. So it was a little different experience. Like, the first time living on my own was in, the middle of Connecticut and West Hartford. Obviously a very different experience than in Brooklyn or in the city. But I agree. It would be tough, if we're looking back to go east, it would be tough to think about, like, hey, you're gonna get a 2-bedroom apartment for $6,000, $7,000 a month. Like, it's wild. It's a different world.
And it's no bigger than this studio.
Exactly. Yeah.
You have a hole in the wall, 2,500.
There's no trains going outside the studios.
Yeah, it's nuts, man. It's nuts. It's again, it's the best place in the world to grow up in, but I don't know about living. I hope I never leave the lovely Sin City that I'm located in now. Give me the origin story of how you got into the sports betting space, because I'm always fascinated with the conversations, because I feel like the true betting and gambling enthusiasts, the real D-gens out there, and I say that with a badge of honor, I feel like it always starts at a young age. Where the people that got into it now the last couple of years because they got really popping on the internet and it's like the thing that everyone discussed.
Yeah.
I'm like, you weren't in the trenches with us, man. You weren't having to drive into other states to make sure your location services were on in order for you to make your bets. So what's the Ben origin story with betting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was something that always interested me. I like to tell people, you'd probably agree, like, in New York City, I think you're always around gambling in some capacity, whether that's, on the street or there's some card game going on or sports betting. So I think you're always kind of exposed to it a little bit in that way. For me, it kind of started in earnest. There was like a pool that was being run. I think it was in high school that we started, where you picked basically every NFL game against the spread.
Damn, you went right into the spread.
So it was like $5 a week.
Yeah.
Which, that you can afford that $5. That's okay. So whatever it was, 100 some bucks for the season. And once you kind of start thinking about the game in that way, I always kind of said it's a little bit like Plato's Cave or something. Like, once you see sports that way and you start thinking about it, not just like who's going to win, who's going to lose, but by how much, or player props or all these other things, it's kind of tough to go back.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like, so
you are talking right now. Yes.
it's just the way you kind of experience it. And so for me, once you see that, and I'm not somebody who's betting large sums of money a game or, in any capacity like that. I really enjoy looking at it that way and making knowledgeable bets and all that. But once you see the game that way, it's kind of just tough to go back. And it was always kind of a more, I guess, advanced discussion of sports, right? And I think back then, so when I graduated and then was starting to work at ESPN 2010, 2011, editing Chad Millman's podcast and editing some of his work on ESPN.com, his blog. He was writing 5 days a week back then. Thankfully, he doesn't have to do that now. In charge of Action Network. It was just, you learn so much, and sports betting was almost like this, I guess, I don't want to say cool club, right? But like everyone had a nickname, and there was like certain terminology and a backdoor cover, and you had like Al Michaels and Brent Musburger and Chris Berman like making these veiled references to sports betting, but not actually coming out and saying,
Right.
like, you know, that hit the over, right, with
right.
a
They would
field
be
goal late.
they would be slick with it. They would say, you know, that helped some people,
Right.
Or that sent that game over, or
Right.
things like that. Little codes to
And
make it fun.
yeah, so I think that always interested me, and then kind of, you know, that was kind of how I started a bit. And then as a career, it was more kind of just falling into it. So at ESPN, doing some of that with Chad, I happened to be kind of the person who was editing a lot of the blog and, you know, the podcast as well. And eventually they started ESPN Chalk, which was a sports betting vertical, and needed someone to run it. And whether I was the right person for the job or the only person there who could do it, you know, we'll never know.
Right place, right time, man.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
That's a lot of life. And so it kind of started from there. I was econ psych in school, and I feel like sports betting is basically that, right? If you're looking at the intersection of those two things. And so it kind of just grew as an industry, and I was lucky enough to be kind of at the start of that wave. You know, a college professor always said, like, you want to be riding the wave, right? And I think I was lucky enough to be at the bottom, and now we're kind of, you know, we're not cresting, hopefully, yet, but we're definitely towards the top, and it's kind of one of the hot industries, certainly in sports and sports media.
If you had to put a number on it from 0 to 100, as far as where you think we are in the sports betting landscape, where 100 is the absolute like apex and the ceiling, I think we're about a quarter of the way there. I really think we're at like 25% of what it's gonna become, because we still have the states, like the juggernaut states, that still don't allow it.
Right.
Like California is one of them, and then like Florida, I believe, still, right?
And
Texas, yeah. So those three alone, where everywhere else in the country, it's pretty much accessible to them. And once those walls get broken, I think the sky's the limit, man. That's why I keep telling people that, because a lot of people come in here and they create content, right? Like in the studio here at the Win. And they'll ask me about, especially if they're sports content creators, I'm like, man, you are dropping the ball if you are not discussing betting on your show. You don't need to be out there and breaking it down the way I do. I've been doing this for my whole life, has been around betting. But mention the point spread. Mention a prop. You know, this slot wide receiver always does really well against zone defenses. Maybe take their over on their catches. Say something like that. I'm telling you, it's a big market that still has untapped potential. And for me, I think that number's at 25%. What would you say it is for you?
So I guess I'd reframe it a little bit.
Okay.
Since my Twins just advanced. Going back to baseball, I feel like a lot of people go with the kind of baseball game analogy, and that we're in kind of like the top of the first inning, right? Or maybe the bottom of the first inning. I would probably agree. I think we're in somewhere in the first inning. A couple reasons. One, like you said, like California, Texas, Florida is a massive, massive amount of people. And that being said, right, those are people that then would have access to legal sports betting. Those people are still betting, right? It's the same way that before 2018, we knew there was an audience for sports betting content. We knew people were betting on sports because at ESPN, those stories did well, right? And those stories weren't doing well because people in Nevada were reading them, right? Who could only legally bet on sports. They were betting on sports just offshore with their local bookie, however. So you certainly knew the content was there. I think another reason is kind of the way it's being integrated into standard media, right? Like Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football. Now those references at the end of games are a little more less opaque, right? It's like they might be able to say they hit an over-under, or that was important for some people and people know what they're talking about. We also have alternative broadcasts, right? I think eventually it'll be part of the main broadcast, or right, like during halftime, there might be a betting expert on to say, here's what I think you might want to bet in the second half, right? In pregame shows, they've started to do this, and College Game Day did it, kind of was one of the first ones years ago to do it as well. But there's a lot more kind of that you can go with that. And then I think just betting apps and technology, right? Something someone said, I think Jeff Ma said it at one of the Sloan Analytics conferences years ago. Sports betting was hard to invest in terms of technology because you had no idea what the market looked like. And you had no idea when the market would take shape, right? It's like, it's not going to be all 50 states. Just get that out of the way right now. It'll be 46 or however many it is.
That's fine.
But it'll be a big market, but nobody knew when it was starting outside of Nevada, and then how quickly all the states would come on board and how quickly mobile betting would come on board. And therefore, I think we've seen in a lot of places, like sports betting technology, you want to compare like those apps to like Uber, right? Or some other technological apps, Amazon. They're so far behind. So I think that will catch up as well. And then the in-game betting is another massive, massive market that has started, but we've seen in Europe and overseas, Australia, that's where the majority of people are betting on soccer games, right, is in-game. That hasn't happened in the U.S. yet. That will continue to happen.
Oh, dude, one of my favorite sports to bet on is soccer. And one of the reasons why is what you said. Like, you'll see it happened yesterday in the Champions League. Bayern Munich was playing Copenhagen. They were playing in Copenhagen. Bayern Munich was like a minus 1,200 favorite on the road in there, and they go down 1-0.
Gave up a goal, yeah.
Gave up a goal, and it was one of those games where it was like the epitome of soccer. Bayern is dominating the whole game, and then Copenhagen has one chance. They score.
They probably had one chance. Yeah.
And they go up 1-0. Immediately, what I did, Ben, open up the app. I'm like, I'm watching the game. I see that they have all these chances. The ball's just not going in. The other team had one counterattack. They scored. Live line, minus 220. Oh, this is minus 1,000 less.
Yeah.
Right? Money line. Bam, they end up winning 2-1. And the game is no longer in jeopardy. Like, even when they go up 2-1, you're like, this is probably going to be an onslaught now. They're just going to keep hammering them. They end up winning 2-1, but those are some of the things that I look at when I'm betting any sport live is, has a team just gotten unlucky? Like, everyone always goes back to the Texans-Chiefs playoff game. The iconic one that kind of sort of made, like, I think that's where the Mahomes legend and the comeback.
Like 24-0.
Yeah.
Like
but if you remember that game, right, it was like a 3-and-out. Then they had it was like a punt issue.
Mm-hmm. There was
short
some
field,
fluky stuff.
Some fluky stuff. And you're like, man, it's still the first quarter. There's a lot of time left. You know, it's not as impossible, right? So when you're watching the game, I do think that's a whole nother level of a conversation too. Like, one thing I like doing in the NFL, and I see here some of the things that you sent me, some trends and whatnot. We'll get into those in a sec. But tell me how you feel about this. You have a big favorite. Let's look at Miami this weekend. Miami is a 11-point favorite right now. They're playing my New York Giants. Of course, I hate when the Giants are playing these. Man, I hate when they play on prime time.
My wife's a Giants fan, so
Yeah.
that was a rough playoff game last year. I'll
Listen,
tell you, that split the house.
Listen, when you before we started recording, you were saying how he checked down on 4th and 8 or 4th and 11, whatever it was. It was like, listen, I thought that was a great play as a New York Giants fan.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Safe.
what I want.
You got to be safe.
You gotta be safe there, Kirk. Don't get aggressive there, baby. Come on. So the Giants, again, they're in a spot here where they're playing Miami. 90% of the bets are coming in on Miami. I don't trust the New York Giants. And I know it's, you bet numbers, not teams, is like a thing. But to me, I've been pretty accurate when it comes to the Giants when you should bet them. I haven't bet them at all this year. I've been against it. I split a circuit contest with my friend Kenny. We put the Giants in there twice. I'm like, dude, I do not like this. I don't care what the numbers are. Dak Prescott has won 11 straight games against them. He just owns them, right? I don't care about the number. They're catching double digits in San Francisco. They don't have the offense to combat that defense that they have. So I don't care about the numbers. This is another example where I don't care about the numbers. I know I kind of went off on a rant a little bit. I'm going to use this Miami game as an example, as one of the things that I like to do, and I sort of preach to people on spots to sort of target when you're watching games. Say the Giants come out and they return the opening kick for a touchdown, and then it's a 3rd and 1. They throw a slant to Tyreek, and he drops the ball. Miami punts, the Giants go down, and they score another touchdown. Now they're down 14-0. This was an 11-point favorite. There's 9 minutes left in the first quarter. You know what I'm doing immediately? Taking out my phone. What can I get on Miami money line? Are they now a 3-point favorite? That's how I like betting big favorites in the NFL, hoping that they do fall behind maybe a touchdown or 10 points. Thoughts on that approach?
Good approach.
Okay.
I think in general, like with live betting, the way to think about it is you're essentially paying for information, right? So a lot of the markets in-game, like you're not going to necessarily get, as it's going to be juiced up a little more than pre-game in terms of just kind of a straight bet. But you have information, right? So let's say that game starts and Tua gets hurt in the first quarter. Well, the in-game algorithm isn't going to completely know that the backup quarterback's in and not Tua necessarily, right? You have to have kind of a manual person who can adjust for that. Same thing, like you said, you want to see, are things fluky, or like, are the Giants just moving the ball on the defense, and like maybe it's just not Miami's day, right? Like they just went 2 80-yard drives, unlike your example, right? But let's just say the Giants were moving the ball. You're like, yeah, you know what? Actually, like this line was just wrong. I think the Giants are now, I could have gotten plus 11. Now the Giants are whatever, -3. And it's just a stay away if you're betting that certain way. But I think you're really looking for the information you get once the game started, right? What did I learn? Because like you said, it's the same game, right? You could have gotten the Giants or the Dolphins -11. Now they're +2. Obviously, that's a much better number. But what did you kind of learn that got you to that? And how much time is there left? Is there weather? Like all those things to factor in. But it's a great way to play it because the in-game algorithms aren't going to kind of, there's no eye test, right? They just have, if this is a certain score and these are the 2 power ratings and here's where they are on the field and number of possessions, all that stuff. If you feel like I'm watching the game, I feel like I have a better sense of what's going on. I think it's a great way to make a bet. And like you said, you can get a lot better numbers potentially in-game if the game goes that way, right? There's also the opposite where the Dolphins come out and score 2 touchdowns, and now it's whatever, -19, right? Instead of -11. So the important thing, like you said, is you have a game plan and you kind of stick to that, right? And if it goes a certain way, great, you got a shot, fire on Miami at a better number. If it's not, stay away, or wait to halftime, second half, all of that, because that is the great thing with in-game. There always is potentially an opportunity, and there's the total as well. There's other things like the in-game markets are only growing, but it's a great way, especially in a game, a lot of games that are kind of a toss-up. It's a great way to like, you know what? I'm going to watch the first drive for each team, and then I'm going to decide if I want to bet, rather than I have to have a bet before every single NFL game. Right, the NFL markets are sharp for a reason. They're really hard to beat. You want to, if you don't have any advantage on a game, don't just be firing on NFL games because it's Sunday and they're on.
That's a big change in my approach to handling the NFL the last 2 seasons. It's, just because there's a Thursday night football game doesn't mean I need to bet it.
It's tempting to bet it.
Absolutely. And then you get roped into maybe doing it because you and I are at the bar and you're like, man, I'm on the Bears this week. I really think the Bears, and I think Justin Fields scores a touchdown.
Yeah.
Then me, the degenerate I am, I take out my phone. This isn't even my phone, but I take out a phone and I'm just like, you know what?
All right, I'm tailing you.
I'm in. Yeah. We're gonna watch this game together. Let's have something to root on. But for the most part, and I'm the same way how you were describing it too. I take a professional betting approach as far as like, I limit the parlays. I don't do as many parlays as I once did, and I'm actually seeing my bankroll is growing. Ironically enough, that's how it goes, right? But
it's shocking how those two might be correlated in some way.
Who would have thought these pros actually know what they're talking about? You put up this tweet every week, and I reference it. I always check it. I think it's really helpful. And it was something that I spotlighted on the show last week about the public sides. And first of all, I'm fascinated how you get this information. How do you go about getting this information?
So there's kind of a bunch of different ways. Like basically, just depending on which site you want to look at, have different numbers. I would say from putting it kindly, some more reputable sources than others, right? So a lot of those are from VSiN, and they are through the DraftKings API. They're updated every 10 minutes. Like that's what people are
Sounds
betting on.
credible.
Now, I think there's a lot of discussion around public betting because people are going to say, well, if those aren't the sharps, then why do I care what Joe in Philadelphia and 10 of his friends are betting on the game? I think in the long run, in general, if you go against 80% of the public, you're going to win, right? There's a reason that they're building casinos in Las Vegas. It's not because people are winning at slot machines and betting on the NFL. So there are still going to be those circumstances, right? We saw that a lot with Colorado in college football, right? Deion Sanders' team, everybody's betting on them in the first couple weeks. They're not only covering, they're winning. They beat TCU. They cover as a plus 700 underdog, win the game outright. But in general, for the long term, going against the public, you're generally going to be profitable. So people love them, people hate them. I think it's just another piece of information to use. I generally wouldn't only say, hey, 90% of the bets are on this team. I'm going the opposite way, right? And different things change games quickly. This was the same case with the Chiefs on Sunday night against the Jets.
Yep.
90% of the bets at every sports book and 80+% of the money were on the Chiefs. It was -8, -8.5. That game was 17-0, and maybe if there isn't a holding penalty in the end zone to get the Jets a safety and turn that game around, maybe it ends up 31-3. It's a completely different game. It's hard to know. But in the end, the Chiefs end up covering. That Patrick Mahomes slide heard around the world and around the sports books. I think it's just an interesting piece of information to use. But in terms of those actual numbers, that's where I'm getting it basically every week.
And think about the impact sports betting has on the talk shows, because this a decade ago isn't even brought up really.
Yeah.
Where Nick Chubb running out at the 2-yard line, whether it was last year or the year before, Todd Gurley.
Todd
Gurley, I think, is the most iconic one. They were playing the Packers. It was in LA. And I remember that one because that was right when it got legal in Jersey. And then people were like, holy shit, it's corrupt, it's rigged. Like everyone started those conversations.
And he made some Vegas. He was like, I don't care about Vegas. I don't care about your fantasy teams.
Right. Well, in the past, it always used to be about the fantasy teams. But now it's like, oh, I don't care about your parlays, or I don't care about your bets, whatever it might be. But I wanted to highlight how the public has been on fire this year, dude. And last week, you had put up a tweet about the public money, 70% or more of the bets in week 3. The public went 7-1, right? And then last week, the public went 4-5, but the public was 0-4 on 4 of the games that had 75% or more of the bets, right? So it was like the Chiefs, like you mentioned, the Bengals. You had the Eagles -8, and then you had Miami +3. So it's like there's always going to be regression. So whenever I see something like this, if I really, really like a game, I don't let it sway me. If I'm on the fence with one, it's a fade or pass the game completely. I got to narrow it down to 5 picks for the circa millions that I'm in. But for the most part, it's the only sport that the public betting does sway me a little bit off it. Whereas I'm a big UFC bettor, and I feel like that's the sport that I do the best in, because I know a lot of the fighters, like their fight style. So I know this guy's a ground guy, maybe bet him by submission. This guy's a knockout artist. So I love betting props in the UFC. But with the UFC, if I know you and another person are fighting, and I'm on you winning the fight regardless of the odds or what, 98% of the bets are coming in on Ben. Well, that's why I think he's going to win. With fighting, it's completely different because it's mano y mano as opposed to having, 11 guys on the field and it being a team sport. But
if 90% of the bets are on me to win a fight, then I think I'd take the other side on that one, man. I'm not built for that. But I think it's just another piece of data to use. Yeah. And look, I think this is also the difference between there's a lot of casual to intermediate bettors, right, versus respected bettors. I understand respected bettors don't care where the public is, right? You have a model. You're going to go off of the model. You're going to make some tweaks. Sure, maybe I'll take a peek and see where the public is. It's not going to affect you. I think for the general kind of casual public, it's another piece of information that's interesting. Again, you can choose to use it, you can choose to not use it. I think there's a lot of hate over those numbers, and I understand why, but I think there's different types of sports betting content that resonate with kind of different groups as well.
No, for sure. Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more. But I also feel as if sometimes, I don't care what your power ratings are or what your numbers are. If you have a shitty offense going up against an elite defense, probably going to stay off that game.
Yeah.
And especially when it's, how do you feel about betting on your team?
So I was actually going to go back to that. I think it's interesting because you either have a much better sense of your team, right? Because you watch them all the time.
Correct.
Or you're kind of like too close to the sun and you can't see something about your team. So it sounds like you have a pretty good grasp on the team. I generally would say people should not bet on their teams. If you want to intentionally, like today, I bet on the Blue Jays against the Twins.
Emotional hedge.
An emotional hedge, right? You want to bet against it, you win either way. I would generally just avoid betting on your teams because it's difficult to kind of gauge how much your emotion is in there, like you said, whether there's a model involved. I think for most people, you're just looking at a number, you're checking out some trends, right? You're not in the here's what my model says kind of framework of sports betting. So it's generally one I'd say like that's one of the rules is don't bet on your teams and stay away, just watch the games. But to each his or her own, it's up to everyone. But it is something that you're probably going to get in more trouble betting on or against your team. It's usually better to just steer clear.
Yeah, it's weird, man. I tend to bet on my team or not bet it at all.
Because if you bet, for example, on the Giants and they lose, now you're doubly upset because you lost money and they lost the game.
Correct.
Right? So it is like a lose-lose in that situation. But then the emotional hedge, you also could lose money, right? So it depends how much you love the team, how big a game it is, all those things too.
So like I'll give you an example. Monday night I was on the Giants. The line got to +1.5. I felt like the Giants at home as an underdog going up against Seattle. Seattle's not exactly a juggernaut. But then, Daniel Jones got sacked, 11 times I think it ended up being.
It wasn't great.
Threw a pick six. Yeah, it looked ugly. But like that was a spot where I was like, you know what? That's where I would want to bet the Giants as a home dog. I prefer betting them there as opposed to a double-digit road underdog going up against the best team in the NFL probably in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, man. These conversations are always interesting. You have something dope over here that you sent me. And it's fascinating because for a couple of years now, I've been talking about how we know about how valuable a quarterback is to the point spread. Like that's the most obvious one. But I think over the last 5 to 6 years, mostly with like the emergence of Aaron Donald and his dominance, I feel like people started saying, "Oh, you know what? This guy's worth half a point. This guy's worth a full point, and he's not a quarterback." And you have the most valuable position players in the league right now, and the three that you have are Travis Kelce, 1.83 points against the spread. Tyreek Hill from Miami, 1.75. Then you got Justin Jefferson, 1.67. I don't disagree with any of them. The one that I think the highest one that I was handicapping for was the Rams Super Bowl year, Cooper Kupp.
Yeah.
There I remember saying how, first of all, I thought he was the MVP that year. I really did. Because if you looked at the whole body of work.
Unstoppable.
Yeah. But the whole season, his worst game, he had, I think, 7 for 77 with a touchdown. Right? Which is still a really good game. And it was the only time that I was like, that guy might be worth like 2 to 3 points against the spread for what he meant in that offense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so just in case there's any hate mail, these are all from Vegas bookmakers, not my personal ratings.
No,
so
yeah.
I basically...
you're right. I should have mentioned that too.
No, it's all good. I basically asked them, I kind of had a list of, I think it was about 30 players. I went through the rosters and I said, hey, these guys, a couple were on the fringe. And so I asked and kind of saw, hey, is there actually like, not a Chase Claypool, but a Christian Watson, for example, right? Or someone, it's like DJ Moore. And these guys are really, some of those are under half a point. So they matter a little bit, but you can't really, for Vegas bookmakers, ask them for about, 57 different players.
Yeah.
So I think Travis Kelce was, him and Tyreek Hill were kind of the two. When I originally asked this to a bookmaker, one of the guys a couple weeks ago, he had Tyreek as the top one at 2 points against the spread. And he said even back with Kansas City, he had him as the most valuable. I think those were the top three for everyone in some order. Some had them all tied at 1.5. Some had Tyreek ahead of Kelce. Some had Kelce ahead of Tyreek. But in terms of how much those guys are worth, and again, a lot of it is depending on the offense, right? Or like with the Rams, Cooper Kupp's the guy. Now, you got Puka Nacua as well, who before the season, no one knew. And that's, I think, why Kupp was even more valuable or perceived as more valuable before. Maybe he's even a little less now based on the marginal difference. But some of those guys, like Kelce, you saw how the Chiefs looked against the Lions week one. Lions have a great defense, or a good defense at least, but they're just a completely different team, and he's a great blocker, And even with two guys, sometimes you can't cover him. And Tyreek Hill is just, you have to have a safety over the top. And even then, he might still get open, and he just completely controls the way you have to play a defense. And then you have Jalen Waddle and Mostert and all the other speed that they have too. So it was an interesting exercise. Like, I think you were talking about defensive players. There were a couple guys. Myles Garrett was the top one, just barely. I think T.J. Watt, Aaron Donald, were there like 0.75
So
points.
that surprises me. I would have guessed T.J. Watt. If you were to tell me blindly, like, oh, there's a defensive player, I would have guessed T.J. Watt. Because Pittsburgh last year was 8-2 with him, and then they were 1-6 without him. And just the way the whole defense works, it's mostly because of him. And it was fascinating to be able. I'm not a fan of going to football games. I think the TV product is really, really dope, especially when you have other games going on. Now, I am a little bougie, Ben, where if you hit me up and you're like, hey man, this Monday I have tickets for the Steelers Packers, no hesitation, I'm in. But if it's a 1:25 Pacific time Raiders game, I'm gonna be like, I don't know, man. Red Zone is dope. I'm comfy on the couch.
You got the books here.
You got the books here, yeah. And also for me with the content, like I have several monitors set up. I have tablets, so I kind of have a game on everything. I have like 5 or 6 screens. But I don't like going to the games. But I went to the Raiders Steeler game, and I was zoned in on T.J. Watt, and it was the Raiders were moving up and down the field when he was stepping off the field. Then when he came in, turnover, sack, QB hit, and you're like, damn, this dude is a buzzsaw. So for me, I would have picked him.
And those guys are close.
Right.
I think he might have been like 0.75, and Garrett was like 0.8, basically.
Gotcha.
So you talk to two
We're
other
grasping at straws.
Yeah, you talk to two other bookmakers, they might have a little different rating. But those guys in general, I think the other one I didn't ask as much about were like corners. I think people also brought that up, right, as like Sauce Gardner or some others. That's another kind of area I think I'd potentially explore if you go back kind of and ask about some of those other guys. Again, there's not going to be a ton of them, right? Like the second cornerback on the Giants,
Right.
Deontay Banks or whoever it is, like they're not going to be impacting the spread. But some of those, Jalen Ramsey's coming back in a couple months, right, for the Dolphins. Like some of those big guys probably impacted a little bit. And you mentioned, I think the 49ers they had 4 guys who impacted the spread, if I remember correctly. They had Debo, Kittle, Bosa on defense, and McCaffrey.
Yeah.
And McCaffrey was worth over a point. He was the highest running back. It's tough to argue with, right? Chubb was up there, but McCaffrey just does it all, and he's the perfect weapon for that offense.
Yeah. How do you feel about him with this MVP momentum that's picking up? Do you think it's possible for a non-QB? We haven't seen it in about a decade plus.
I mean, the last guy was,
AP,
my
your
guy,
boy.
Adrian Peterson. He was the offense, right? I think McCaffrey, in a sense, is only hurt a little bit. And like I said, they just have such a good team.
Yeah.
Now, you don't want to say like anyone else could be that if you put in like Tyler, Algiers from the Falcons or something. But could he be like 70% of Christian McCaffrey? Like probably. I think Kyle Shanahan is that good a play caller, and that team is that good, and they've somehow missed out on the Super Bowl, right, through just this myriad of unfortunate events the last couple seasons. Like they are such a good team, but he's playing amazing kind of MVP-ish ball. I think he also needs some of those quarterbacks to cancel each other out a bit, right? If nobody has an unbelievable season, then yeah, he definitely still has a shot. It's just right now kind of a quarterback and everyone else award.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the case too, man. But it's fascinating because in July we were talking about how if I had to pick one guy to win MVP that's a non-quarterback, it was going to be him. And he was 150 to 1. And then when the season started, it got down to like 125. He was my offensive player of the year pick. Got him at 20 to 1. Really nice number too.
Looking good. Yeah.
Yeah. And the case was because we didn't know about Brock Purdy at the time. Was it going to be Sam Darnold? He was the perfect guy for this system. Debo has kind of regressed from what he was 2 years ago before he got paid. And then Kittle now seems to have 2 to 3 blow-up games a year. And then the rest of it is just, let's keep him healthy. Maybe we unleash him when we need to. Like this week would be an example where maybe you see like a vintage Kittle performance going up against the Cowboys, right? Like they'll save him.
He's the Ferrari in the garage.
Yeah.
Like you're saving it for the right opportunity, but it's
like
it's going to be there.
The tail end of the Patriots dynasty with Gronk, where Gronk was a bona fide sort of just blocking tight end.
Yeah.
And then, we're playing Kansas City.
We need him.
Yeah, we're playing. Who else was good at that time? Like maybe they were playing Denver with Peyton Manning.
Baltimore.
Baltimore. Yeah. All right, now we're gonna unleash the Gronk.
Yeah.
And that's what was happening, man. It was that's what I think could happen with like a guy like Kittle. So there's one other thing I want to ask you. These biggest Super Bowl 58 bets by liability. These are wild. Are these like the biggest bets that you were able to dig up, or are these advertised? Like, how do you go? Is there someone now in like Seattle that has $1 million on the Seahawks and we just don't know about it? Like, how does that become public knowledge to everyone?
So yeah, I mean, these are basically, I keep track of these. These are USA Today now. And it's something I did at ESPN and VSiN too. I was just think it's interesting to look back, especially as we get further along in the season, and see what some of these are. Some of these are, I talked to a bookmaker and they gave me basically this information. Some of it is that it was tweeted out and kind of, you saw that. Some of it is there's media emails that are sent to certain people. And then very rarely it's you actually know the person who did that and they tell you.
Right.
So with all of those, that's kind of how you put together the list. And some books will tweet it out themselves. It could be like the Beau Rivage account in, Mississippi or Louisiana. I got one of those two. I think Louisiana. But that's kind of how you compile the list. And I always just think it's fun to kind of go back through. Like there was one last year. Someone bet on Will Fuller like $1,000 at, I don't know, 700 to 1 or something to lead the league in receptions or receiving yards. And like he was retired, right? He didn't play a game. Like, so there's some fun ones. On this one, someone bet $1,000 on the Cardinals at 400 to 1, right? To win the Super Bowl. It's like probably a bit rich for $1,000. Like Cardinals are playing great. I think people thought they were going to be one of the worst teams ever. But I don't think they're probably winning the Super Bowl. So it's just fun to kind of look at some of these and see kind of the total payouts as well. And more of these are shared, I think, in the years after legalization. Previously, it was like you really had to ask for these and kind of mine them. And now a lot of them are out on Twitter. Some of this is kind of just an aggregation of what's out there. And then some of this is knowing the bookmakers and being able to text them and say, hey, any big bets you guys are allowed to share, et cetera. And this kind of varies from book to book as well.
And has there been situations where, say, someone doesn't want that information out there?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a couple books here in town and nationally,
or even
for
just
a variety of reasons,
or even just the player too. Like, say if I went to a sports book and I just put $10,000 on a future. It's like I don't want that out there to the public. Yeah,
I think they will respect those wishes. Like, I always find it funny sometimes because it's like if you bet, somebody bet $100,000 on the Miami Dolphins, right, at 13 to 1 at BetMGM. Nobody knows who that person is.
Right.
BetMGM's available in 20-some states.
Yeah.
Right? It could have been any of those at either mobile or a retail book. I get it. Like, you want to protect the privacy of a customer. I think for certain wagers, right, if it's somebody bet $3.5 million on a very specific UFC fight, you can understand why they probably want some privacy, depending on who they bet on, and
Right.
where it was, etc. But for the most part, yeah, I just think it's a fun, interesting thing to have out there. Again, some people love them on Twitter, some people hate them. I just think it's fun to follow some of those as well, or the giant money line bets of, someone bet $50,000 on Alabama at minus whatever 40,000 odds to beat Middle Tennessee State, right?
To
They'll
win,
win $100.
Yeah.
Like those are just fun things to follow along. It's kind of, you asked before about gambling news. I think they're like soft gambling news and kind of hard gambling news. To me, the hard gambling news is like, you're telling me why I should bet on the Giants plus 11 this week. And then there's a ton of soft gambling news out there, right? Who's the Super Bowl favorite? Who's the favorite to win the MVP? What are Giannis's MVP odds, right? Like the Bucks are now the favorite for, I think, the first time in like over 40 years to win the title. Those are just like interesting nuggets for sports bettors, sports radio, and to basically be a smarter fan at a bar, right? Doesn't mean you have to place a futures bet on the Bucks or anyone else. You can not gamble on it at all. It's just kind of an interesting nugget. And that's where I think sports betting hopefully evolves a bit in terms of having that information. It's just out there. Nobody's saying you have to bet on every single thing. It's just making you a smarter fan as well.
Yeah, and I think it also eliminates a lot of biases.
Mm-hmm.
And the sports books are not going to give you layups.
No.
If they're
not.
telling you that your team is probably going to win 4.5 wins, you're probably not going to win the Super Bowl that year.
Right.
So it lets you know that you're probably going to be a fringe playoff contender.
Yeah.
So it's I always look at that as, all right, what do I liked, for example, I was big on the Saints coming in because of their schedule, some of the additions that they made. And I've always been a pro Derek Carr guy, even though that take is not aging that well this year so far. However, they were someone that I was high on. And then when I saw the win total with the sports books at 9.5, I'm like, okay, it's not really that ridiculous. If they would have dropped it at 5.5, I'd be like, damn, I need to reevaluate this process that I have and whatever my analytics are or looking at the schedules. There's something wrong here. So it eliminates a lot of your personal biases, I think, and it's dope.
For sure. I did an article asked a ton of kind of NFL guys who I respected about some futures bets. I think 3 of them had the Saints over. I think it was 8.5, or it was 9.5. Some had the alts over 9.5 or 10.5 at plus money. And a lot of the reason was because of the schedule and just the quarterbacks they're playing, strong defense, and they figured the NFC South was going to be pretty bad. I don't think anyone saw the Bucks having this good a start either. But there's just so much that goes into it as well. And like you said, the odds makers are looking at a lot of things. So generally, if something seems like it's too good to be true, it probably is. There aren't a whole lot of things that they're missing, unless maybe you found like a prop market in a very, very small soccer game, somewhere in a third-tier division. They might have made a mistake on that. They're not going to be making too many mistakes in the NFL.
Yeah, no, you're not going to get no layup or any additional give-me's in the NFL. It's very, very rare. If not, it probably never happens either. I do want to mention the biggest Super Bowl liabilities from what you gathered. Cowboys 16-1 odds at Caesars Sportsbooks. $100,000 wager. Total payout will be $1.6 million. That one looks good. That one looks possible.
The Diggs injury hurts.
Yeah, it does.
But that's still possible.
Yeah. Dolphins 13-1, like you mentioned. BetMGM $100,000 to win $1.3 million. That one seems very good. I'm sure they're happy holding that ticket. And then this one, I mean, I think you could sort of get one of those big buckets, throw some gasoline in there, and just throw that ticket in there because someone put $20,000 on the Raiders at 40-1 odds at Caesars for a potential payout of $800,000. Yeah, you ain't seeing that $800K, bro. So we could just save you the headache and the time. You won't need to worry about that one. But Ben, this was fun. This was also like a pretty cool honor for me, man, to have you on. I genuinely mean it. That I was a fan of yours, still am a fan of yours. I love all the information that you put out. It's super helpful for someone like me who talks about this stuff too, to have a source like you to be able to go there and just gather all that information. I appreciate you coming on the show. Before we go, though, give me a Week 5 bet that you like.
So I'll preface by saying that I generally am the person giving out the information, not the handicapping.
Gotcha.
I think
Come on, you gotta dive in a little bit.
you got to go in a little bit. I think the Saints going, and it's on the road. It's New England. I think they're +1 right now, and the Packers. It's about -1, -1.5 at the Raiders. I just think the Packers are better than the Raiders, and I think the Saints are better than the Patriots. Patriots look a little ready to implode. Judon's out. Christian Gonzalez is out.
Oh, dude, I got so upset when I saw that report. 'Cause
That
he was
defense is tough now.
He was my defensive rookie of the year pick. I loved him coming out of college from Oregon, and
Played great.
he played great, dude. Like, I like young corners, and I was talking about that with Josh. He's sitting here in the background now because he's a Washington fan. I like when my young corner has like balls, and it's Tyreek one-on-one, no problem.
Yeah.
It's Forbes was going one-on-one against AJ Brown. Yeah, are you going to get cooked? Probably, but you want that challenge. Like, I love that in young corners. You saw that with Sauce all of last year.
Yeah.
Patrick Surtain the second when he was his rookie year coming out with the Broncos. Like, that's what I really want in corners. But I couldn't agree with you more, man. Like, sometimes it's just a better team, right? And I don't think the whole Belichick thing, that we're holding on to something he doesn't have that fastball anymore.
And you lose some of those key plays. Judon's a guy who I think football people know is really important. The general public probably doesn't. Like, he's super important.
Yeah.
Christian Gonzalez is valuable. They just can't score, too. Mac Jones has been terrible. I think the Saints also, you like the Giants, right? Sometimes in the NFL, it's about spots. The Giants probably couldn't look any worse. I don't want to just bet on them because 90% of the bets are on the Dolphins. But like we said, there generally aren't too many layups in that case, and it's hard to believe the Giants could look worse. Now, they could also get beat 70-20 like the Broncos against the Dolphins, but that's another one I have my eye on to kind of see where that line goes over the rest of the week too.
Yeah, I think it'll be a 49-10 kind of game with the Dolphins.
So you're staying away?
Yeah, I'm staying away from that one. There's no way. I think Miami's going to be a very popular eliminator pool pick. And I think it's just the right one. Like me with my eliminator pool, I have 3 entries still left in a couple of eliminator pools that I'm doing. Nothing too crazy, but did 3 entries, still have 3, and I call them multiple condom intercourse plays, where I've taken the Chiefs, I've taken the Bills, I've taken the Niners. I took who did I take last week? Last week I took someone that was I took the Niners, like I said. And it's, I'm not going to plan to take Kansas City week 11 because I might not get to week 11. Yeah. So now some of the options, do I take Washington Thursday night? That seems gross. Do I take the Bengals? Everyone is saying, oh, this is the spot to get right. But I don't know. Just weird vibes coming out of Cincinnati. And then.
So how many points do I have to give you to take the Giants this week? I gave you 21 points.
Oh, 21, I would probably take it. But I think up until 14, I'd probably still take Miami.
It'll be interesting to see if it gets there. It's going that way so far.
It is. Ben, this was awesome, man. Tell the people where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, just on Twitter. Recently got an Instagram, so had to do that to get on Threads. But just bfawkes22 on Twitter and some on Instagram. And yeah, man, thanks for having me on.
No, absolutely, dude. And I hope we could do this again. Definitely going to have all his stuff in the bio of this episode. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back after these ads with some more NFL for Week 5.
In his element, I'm a gold medalist, bronze like your medal is. So many deer in headlights, but it's bedtime. Hear that supper bell, main course, be the venison.
Dab. Most dangerous game. Either kill or be